Jennifer Junkyard Moritz. She currently programs films for the SF Doc Fest, Indie Fest, and QDoc as an independent contractor and provides advice and assistance to various filmmakers and online streaming services. Award-winning DJ and club promoter and producer of multiple nightclubs, including 2 long-running and award-winning clubs, Junk and Litterbox. Jennifer holds a BA in Motion Pictures and Television from UCLA. Jennifer Junkyard Morris.
Well, I'm doing this on the fly. I didn't prepare anything because I knew I would be inspired by all my fellow panelists. But I wanted to tell the story of, as Rachel was saying, it became just this, you'd have like 500 people at these meetings, and very little could really happen. And of course, us industrious lesbians decided often to meet outside of the larger meetings. We used to have brunches at my old house, 122 Webster Street, labia brunches. But then we found out and got the script for a wonderful film that was going to be shot in San Francisco called Basic Instinct. And we realized that we really needed to hunker down and do something here, and that was a great opportunity to do some great actions and to get the word out about how we felt about sexist, lesbophobic, biphobic representations in Hollywood. So a small group of us decided to meet and form, and it was a mixture of women, and we also had men, and the men were very wonderful in saying that in any media that we do, we only want the women to be the spokespersons, and it was really a much better way of working. It was probably about 12 of us in this group, which actually science says, yes. We found out, we had the script, so we knew who did it, who was the murderer in the film. And so we decided to call ourselves Catherine Did It. And one of our tactics was to give away the ending of the film. And so we did protests at the filming locations for the film, where it is true many people got arrested at the site where they were filming Basic Instinct. Someone reminded
in jail.
Yes. Someone reminded me of a really great story where someone, I wasn't there, but at one of the protests, someone had a whole bunch of circular little mirrors with sticky tape on them and just passed them out, and for some reason people were putting them on their forehead. So everyone was putting them on their forehead, and it freaked out the security. You know, they were what's going on? And someone gave them just this great, like, well, we're reflecting ourselves, some just great, like, sort of convoluted, really wonderful, like, sinister reason why we had these mirrors. And I remembered seeing the security guard go up to the director, and he's like, why are they wearing those? And he said, some kind of cultural thing. Gay cultural thing. Anyways. But I think one of the reasons that Catherine Did It was really so very successful was because we were a small group, but we also put together, which I hope are in the museum, activist packets. We made 2 packets of information, and one was for activists and ideas for protest, things that you could do, ways to interact with the media. And we sent that to every Queer Nation group and every political organization that we could across the country. But then we also had a press packet. And so we put a press packet together with tons of information about, homophobia in film and our problems that we had with this film, our thoughts about the film. And that was sent to every movie reviewer in the country, in the US. And The wonderful thing I think about that is that they looked at it, because I'm sure they'd never received a packet like that before about the film. And in every review that was coming out, they would mention, they wouldn't say Catherine did it, but they would mention Queer Nation, they would mention the problems that we were having with the film, which I think was really, it got it onto a national scale and it got into the media, and actually we had Anne, who I wish she could have been here. She was on Entertainment Tonight, the news stations. Actually, she had a great story. She reminded us that she wasn't out to her parents, and she was our main media person, so she was being interviewed all the time. And I think it was a cousin, some relative saw her on the news, and they knew she was going to be on Entertainment Tonight, and they're like, "You've got to tell your mom." She watches Entertainment Tonight. So she had to come out. So she knew she was going to be on Entertainment Tonight. She actually came out to her mother before that. And I just thought that was just an amazing story. And actually when she was telling that story, someone else chimed in. Judy Cisneros, who was with Queer Nation Los Angeles and was one of the organizers of the big protest that happened at the Academy Awards, the Oscars, which has kind of been lost in history. I think it's not been told very well what happened there. A lot of people don't know that there were people inside the theater and that they actually stood up and chanted and whatnot, and then were led out of the Oscars, and all the news stations and everyone who was there filming were threatened by the Academy not to screen it, not to cut it out, or to not show it, and that footage was never seen, or else they wouldn't be able to interview the stars. They always use that as their thing. It's like, you won't get to interview Tom Cruise, we'll keep him from you. Anyways, so it was a very successful event. But anyways, she was on CNN, and she ended up having to come out to her father because she was going to be on CNN. So I thought that was very interesting, the two people, and it went fine with their relatives. But I think a lot of times too, Catherine did it. We were out in the streets. We were very vocal. And, of course, GLAAD existed at that time, but GLAAD sort of, was taking a back seat. They weren't really, okay, I'm not going to say much more, but anyways.
They like to write letters.
I think that really...
They were more mainstream.
They were more mainstream.
A lot of Hollywood.
But I do think that the work that Catherine did more to raise the visibility for gays and lesbians and the whole LGBT community than with the actions that we did, rather than the behind the scenes, namby-pamby stuff that other organizations do. Well, yeah, so I wanted to tell the Catherine did it story.
Great. Speaking of Catherine did it, I was reading a bit online as I was preparing for tonight, and one fellow in Boston who did an interview where they had a 15-second delay, in case somebody swears or something. Have you heard this story?
You tell that story.
He says, "Oh yeah, I'm from a group called Catherine Did It," and then he goes on blah blah and takes up 15 seconds blah blah, and then he says, "Oh, and that the name of our group gives away the plot," and by that time the name of the group had already aired. There was also Carol Co., the producers of the movie, got a restraining order against us from a municipal judge. They asked that the demonstrators not be allowed closer than 200 yards from the filming. The judge said approved, but 100 feet. So that worked out okay for us. And then there was this cute thing where on Thursday night, a filming night, the demonstrators returned to the Moscone Center. This is from Los Angeles Times, I'm quoting here. They returned to the Moscone Center waving American flags and signs, inviting unsuspecting motorists to honk their horns if they love the 49ers. or if they support the U.S. troops. Some people are hard. Okay.
Oh yes, and glitter bombs.
Glitter bombs.
Glitter bombs.
All right. Carl Knapper has worked and volunteered in the HIV/AIDS community since the early 90s when he began volunteering with the Stop AIDS Project. He currently manages the Black Brothers Esteem program at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, sits on the Community Advisory Board for the UCSF Center for AIDS Prevention Studies, and on the Community Advisory Group for Bridge HIV at the San Francisco Department of Public Health. He is a writer, filmmaker, film curator, and educator, and holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in communication from Stanford University. Carl Knapper.
First, I have to say this is really surreal for me and makes me feel really old. And as some of my friends would say, but you are Blanche, you are. Because, I mean, it's like a reunion, even though I'm sort of bummed because I was really hoping to see a United Colors t-shirt. Because I lost a lot, I've moved and I lost a lot of my coordination junk in those moves, and that was one of my favorite t-shirts, and I'll tell you the story about it later. But I was asked to sort of talk about Queer Nation's legacy, and maybe my perspective, because I used to work at a research project on Martin Luther King, you know, there was good and bad. Like, I actually remember the good, even though some of the discussions about process and other stuff are bringing back some of the bad. Which I was like, oh my God. It took us almost 3 days, if not more, to decide our process. I mean, it was so bad that I thought I was going to kill myself because I was just like, really, people? And I went to, right after that, I went to Vancouver for the Gay Games, and I found this button that said processes for cheese. And so we used to put buttons and stickers on our leather jackets. It was like everyone had a leather jacket. I put it on mine with pride because I was just like, oh my God, I've never experienced anything like this. Really? We're going to spend 3 days? But it actually helped us function, even though it was excruciatingly, horrifyingly, just not something I ever want to go through again. But the thing I'll say about Queer Nation is Queer Nation was not the first thing about when it comes to queer activism. It wasn't the first time gay people started using the word queer. I mean, I think many people would be surprised to know that right after Stonewall, there was a whole group of, you know, people who called themselves queers and were doing radical politics. So the notion that Queer Nation created that, or that all of a sudden people were going to roll over and die because we were using that word, is ridiculous. And I actually, like Rachel, found myself in Queer Nation. I actually came out here in the late 70s to go to college and started coming to the city, but I didn't really see myself in the gay people I saw in the city for multiple reasons. I just didn't feel like I fit in until I found Frameline and the Gay Film Festival, which is where I met Jennifer, because I actually walked down Castro, I saw this film, and I was like, oh my God, it was a Derek Jarman film, and I was like, oh my God, I'm never gonna get a chance to see this film. So I ran in, I saw it, I went to see a bunch of other films, I started volunteering for them just like she did. She started working for them, I joined their board. But the whole thing was, I was dying to find a group of queer people that I could be around, and I really wasn't finding it. And even when I went to ACT UP meetings and all the reasons that group fractured, I didn't find myself in that. And then I heard about Queer Nation New York, and I was like, oh my God, we gotta have one of these in San Francisco. Like, who are these people? And I read like, I Hate Straights, or Gays Read This, and then we got this call from Mark, and I was like, oh yeah. So we went there, and it was like, I've had many good experiences in my life, but that is one of the highlights, that I finally found a group of people who I could be around and feel like I could be myself. It was absolutely amazing. But I also think that Queer Nation, and as Rachel's pointed out, a lot of the stuff we now enjoy and take for granted are because of Queer Nation. Like the whole notion that you want to have queer visibility and queer expression, that didn't really happen in the 70s. Or even in the 80s, you know, even though I was running around listening to my little Smiths records and being maudlin like Morrissey, you know, I worship Morrissey, you know, he understood my pain. But anyway, you know, it was like I still wanted to find a place where I could bring all of me, all the communities I belonged to, and everything else to some place and be who I was. Queer Nation was that. And I also think that like many of the things that have happened since, whether it's gay marriage or other things, are because of what we did in Queer Nation. I don't think it's an accident that those things happen. But I also think we need to have some perspective and realize that like, just like the successes of the civil rights movement and the election of a black president does not mean that America is post-racial. or it does not mean that America still doesn't have to wrestle with the toxic legacy of racism and racial injustice. And I would say the same thing with all the progress that the queer community has made does not mean that we are post-queer, post-gay, or that the struggle is over. There are still many things we need to fight for, and I actually do feel that the people who were involved in Queer Nation, we've actually just taken that and done it in other places. It's not like Queer Nation, I mean, all groups live and die. That's just the way they are, whether the groups in the civil rights movement, groups before that, that's just the nature of groups and the nature of history. It is what it is. And they all fall apart for one reason or another. It's not unique. So the fact that it happened to Queer Nation isn't anything special per se. But but like for me, like I said, like Labia, United Colors, which was the people of color group, it was called the United Colors of Queer Nation, and it was inspired by Benetton, for those of you old enough to know who Benetton is, and their ads and all that stuff, and a box of Crayola crayons. And so actually, that was our t-shirt, was a box of Crayola crayons. And actually, if you want to talk about radical stuff, where we got our t-shirts is one of my best friends worked at Levi's. And so he liberated a bunch of white t-shirts, liberated, from Levi's, and then we used them to screen t-shirts that then allowed us to make money to keep doing whatever we were doing. But I love the fact that Levi's, without knowing it, funded Queer Nation. And most people don't know that story because they weren't involved in it. And actually, my roommate at the time is the one, he's a graphic designer. He couldn't be here, actually. He wanted to be here, William Cavada, but he had to be out of town. He's the one who designed our t-shirt. But, he was really into that because that's what he does. But, I mean, I love that Levi's could make queer activism happen. So, and I also think that the other thing we need to realize is progress is not guaranteed. First of all, it's not linear. Anyone who's aware of what happened in the civil rights movements knows that for every few steps forward you take, you fall back. And anyone who's aware of all the erosions that are happening around civil rights, whether it's affirmative action, voting rights, etc., knows that nothing is guaranteed or permanent. You have to keep fighting for it. And so I would hate to see people become complacent about, we have marriage now, everything's cool, because for some of us, I never wanted to be, I never wanted to be married. My father, if he was alive, would tell you that. I said it once at the dinner table when I was 10, and he's like, shut up, don't say that around your siblings. Because I was like, I'm not getting married, that's not for me. But anyway, it's like that kind of thought, it's like the thought that we have become more assimilated, and I actually think that's a great thing. When I used to teach a class at City College on film, I was like, I'm not really into this notion of positive portrayals because they're really so boring. And we are not like one thing. I said, I long for the day when we have just as much good, bad, and shitty stuff as straight people do out there in the media and the world. And it happened for me when I actually turned on TV and saw an episode of Cheaters with two gay guys. And I was like, I don't watch Cheaters, I just was flipping channels. But I noticed there were two guys, and I was like, where's the woman? And then I was like, oh my God, it's a gay episode of Cheaters. Oh my God. And so right away, this is of course pre-media, so I had to email a friend or call him because this is pre any of that, and say, oh my God, we have arrived. I saw a gay episode of Cheaters. Gay people have arrived. We have trashy TV just like straight people. It is heaven. And it was horrifying to watch too, but it was like, that kind of stuff, it's important for us to be a part of that just like everybody else. When I was involved with Frameline, we used to say that our dream was that there would be a day when there would be no need for a queer film festival, that we didn't have to have special film festivals. And I remember when Frameline didn't even have to fight for films because no one wanted gay films. So then all of a sudden everyone wanted gay films and we had to fight for them and compete with other places, but that's the day. And even the fact that we were able to do what we did without the access, I mean, it's hard to believe it, but it's before there was social media.
Yeah.
I mean, there were no cell phones. There were no cell phone cameras or photos. There was no Vine, Instagram, Snapchat, all that stuff. To get whatever you wanted to put out there in the world, we had to do it all lo-fi. And we did that by stickers, t-shirts, printing articles, doing zines, which took me back. Because zines are so, do you all know what a zine is? Okay, just had to be sure. Sometimes when I talk to people much younger than me, I say things and they look at me like I'm speaking a foreign language, or what's that? And I'm like, oh shit, I know. So, like, what's a rotary phone? I had to explain that to a young person recently, or a pay phone. And I was just like, okay, forget it. But one of the main things for me also is, Queer Nation allowed me to express myself in public. For people who don't know me really well, I'm actually incredibly shy and I do not like speaking in public. It actually makes me nauseous. So having to do that kind of stuff, one of the places I learned to do that was at Queer Nation, because I realized that no one can, should, or will speak for me better than myself, for better or worse. So I had to learn how to express myself and stand up, often in, as some people have pointed out, hostile environments. Because every time I called a white guy on his crap, I became the angry person of color in the group, which is ironic because I'm hardly the angry person of color. But but I am familiar with that stereotype because it's the same as the angry black man. But it got back to me that people said, Carl hates white people, which for anybody who knows me and my friends, they cracked up. They thought that is hysterical. I was like, I hate white people just because I said that was racist. That's what is going on here.
I was a Manny.
Yeah, man. I actually you saw that I hate straights. I took that and reappropriated it and said, I don't hate white people, particularly not white gay men. And I just explained that my expression of what I said to them was not about not liking white people, it's about calling people on their shit. And I also learned from people like Rachel and Jennifer about how men behave in groups and to be cognizant of we need to be careful of what we do, because I saw a lot of that happening in the group, where men behave the way they do in groups, and it was problematic, And so, I wouldn't have had that experience if I wasn't in Queer Nation, and we worked with Levia and groups like that. But it was also being around people who allowed us to realize that, as you pointed out, that just working on queer issues was not enough. That queer issues are part of a larger package of issues that face this country that we need to deal with. And if we just pick and choose, like the little parts we want to work in, that's not going to help us or do any good for us. And it allowed me to get involved in things like the 1983 March on Washington, which for lesbian, gay, and bi rights, which I actually was on. I got elected from San Francisco to represent our group on that. And actually, if you want to know what the name was like, the reason that name got there is because it made me aware of that in San Francisco, we're in a bubble. So gay people in other places are not like gay people in San Francisco. I have to tell you, going to that March on Washington and seeing DC turn really queer was amazing, but it also made me realize that I had more in common with progressive straight people in San Francisco, my friends and I laughed about it, than mainstream gay people from other places. And I even had to ask myself, they were all saying hi to me, but if I was back in their hometown, would they say hi to me? And the answer is probably not. But the whole notion that we could go to DC, and for me, I grew up on the 1963 March on Washington, to go there for something around queer rights, I was like, oh my God, it's heaven, and then to go there and to protest and stuff. But I remember we had, just like Queer Nation, which is probably why I could handle it, we had long, involved discussions about our name. And of course, the people from the coasts and more progressive areas wanted to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. But other people, transgender wasn't even on the table. They could not even wrap their heads around what that was or what it meant. This is before Brandon Tina or anything, so they couldn't handle that. But even bisexual, they got upset they didn't want sexual in the name. And I was like, okay, whatever, But we had to consent just like Queer Nation. So that taught me that sometimes you just have to, we're not going to move forward, and that happened at Queer Nation. You just have to do what you're going to do. But like I said, also working on the King Papers really gave me some perspective, because I remember when we came up with the racism forum, I actually wrote an essay about the first time I ever experienced racism, which is something I'd never told anyone other than my family. My friends didn't even know about it. I kept writing it and saying, I can't do this. I was getting sick to my stomach, because I was going to have to speak in public about something I'd never told anyone. And one of my colleagues at the King Papers gave me 2 essays to read. She gave me an essay by W.E.B. Du Bois, who founded NAACP, about the first time he experienced racism. And it was so much mirrored mine, except 100 years before, that I really realized, okay, I'm not alone in this. And then she also gave me this essay by Bernice Johnson Reagan, who I don't know if all of you know who she is, but she's a civil rights activist, and she was also the founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock. But she wrote this great piece, and I have to make sure I get it right because I don't always remember. It's called Coalition Politics Turning the Century from Homegirls, which is an essay of political essays by women. But it basically said that if you're feeling safe and comfortable, you're not doing the work you need to be doing. She said it's too easy in this day and age, and she was using her own background to say, we can work with people only doing this. Women can only work with women. People of color can only work with people of color. And it's great, and it's safe and comfortable, but the bottom line is you're not doing the work. You need to be out there in an uncomfortable, unsafe environment doing the work. And that happened at Queer Nation, because it was oftentimes unsafe and uncomfortable. And I actually do remember when I read my piece, I didn't even look up. I was sitting there reading it, and I said, I can't look up, I can't look up. And then I looked up, and there were people crying in the audience. You know, people who knew me were crying because I'd never told them the story, but people who didn't know me were like, oh my God, that's really deep and heavy. And that, to me, is the kind of legacy of Queer Nation, that we could just put it all out on the table and talk about stuff that wasn't comfortable and still get through it and learn how to work together. Because, I mean, I really, every time I get upset, frustrated doing coalition politics, I just read Bernice Johnson Reagan. And it settles me down and makes me realize this is it, this is what you have to do. And I also think about the people who went before me, like in the civil rights movement. Like I met this woman, Dorothy Cotton, and I was like, oh my God, what you guys, I mean, I wasn't quite that bad, but I was like, what you guys did was so cool. And she said, well, what you need to understand is when they were sticking those fire hoses and those dogs on us, we weren't sitting back saying, oh, we're creating this larger movement, blah, blah, blah. You know, she said we were only doing what we had to survive. And I was like, oh, I understand now, you know, and Queer Nation is the same thing. It's like, you know, yeah, I mean, I do have to say the group was a little, how do I phrase, I'll just say it. I'd say we're a little overly educated and elitist in many ways, because I was sitting at a dinner table once at one of our meetings and they were complaining about why they couldn't get people of color to come to the group. And everyone had gone around and said like where they went to college, and I was like, oh my God, every one of these people went to college and they all went to an elite college. No wonder they don't get it, you know, and I had to explain to them that doing activism is a luxury. It's, you know, it's like to have the time and energy to go spend 3 hours in a meeting that's going to give you a headache is a luxury. That is not a privilege. That is not something that not everyone can do, you know, and I said, women, you know, they have kids at home. They can, what are they going to, you know, we don't have daycare. We don't have money for daycare. So if you want more women, then you need to provide services so that women can come. If you want people of color to be here, you need to understand their issues and speak to them. But this notion that, you know, it reminded me, I used to be on the Socialist Review. It's an academic leftist magazine. I used to be on their collective, and it used to drive me crazy, all these unreconstructed Marxists who couldn't get why the masses weren't flocking to them and following what they did. And I was like, well, you're not speaking their language. You know, you're not speaking to them. You're speaking at them. In the same way that in many progressive, white progressive groups, people will tell you as a person of color how you're oppressed. And I would be go, really? Like, I think I know how I'm oppressed. I don't need some intelligent white person telling me how I'm oppressed. I get that very clearly. And the fact that you don't get that is rather insulting for you to say that to me tells me all the problem that we have. And that happens sometimes in Queer Nation. So, you know, but, you know, despite all that, or putting all the people of color at the front of an action, I just want to warn you, if you belong to groups and you put all the people of color at the front of the action, that's uncool. You need to understand that people of color don't have the same relationship to the police or to authority figures as white people do. You know, so when I'm standing at City Hall and there are police in front of me, I'm not going, oh, they're my friends or they're my public servants. I'm going, I'm easily spottable, they're going to get me, and they're going to take me to jail. And true story, there was an ACT UP protest where they did a city sweep. All the white people got taken to jails in San Francisco. All the people of color got taken to jails in Alameda County. So all the white people got bailed out that first weekend. All the people of color were still in jail almost a week later because no one knew where they were. And so it's that kind of thing where Queer Nation had to struggle with that because they always wanted to put us in the front. And I was like, no, that's not cool. I don't want to do that. But that's the kind of stuff that we were able to work on that I don't think in other groups I would have been able to work on that. And again, I think the most important thing is what we did lives on, whether it's, you know, in the mainstream culture, whether it's the activism that people are doing, whether it's, you know, dyed hair, multiple piercings, even that's more just San Francisco, but which is another thing I have to get used to. When I travel, sometimes I forget and people are staring at me and I'm like, what's wrong? Like in the old days, it was because I dressed really weird. I had long braids. I used to wear spiked wristbands and all that. But now I'm not very, I don't think I look that different. And then I realized they're looking at my ears and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not in San Francisco anymore. You know, and they'll even say, did that hurt? I said, did that hurt? Like, your earrings. I'm like, do you have piercings? Do you think they hurt? Like, what does that mean? But anyway, I think that whole notion and all that stuff, I think, is what Queer Nation lives on. I mean, the group itself is dead.